This is the video to explain the epithelial tissue, so I'm trying to make sure we've got notes for this, and we are in our histology unit. In our histology unit, this is the study of cells. We have 4 cell types: nervous, muscle, epithelial, and connective tissue. So this video is all going to look at specifically epithelial tissue, which is the covering and protection of the body, and this falls in amongst one of our 4 major cell types that we'll talk about the other ones in another video. So epithelium covers the entire surface of exposed surface of the body and cavities and passageways. So when you think about epithelium, I'd like you to think about this idea of the lining on the outside of the body is all epithelium. What you can see on the skin is your epidermis, and the epidermis is one type of epithelial tissue. It also doesn't mean only the external structures, though. It also means the internal structures as well, which of course is the things like the lining of the digestive tract or your respiratory tract. So all of those things are exposed to potential hazards. Anytime you eat something or breathe something in that could be dangerous to some of the cells, that is covered and is epithelial tissue. So the epithelial system tissue also is your glands. So these are the glands that are wide-ranging, and they're scattered amongst all sorts of other types of cells. We find epithelial all over your body. So it's not just the stuff that's like the tract lining of the tracts, but it's also the stuff that separates and organizes the different parts of your body. So it keeps one organ away from another organ, and so on. So like I said, there's the glands component of 2, but we're not going to focus as much on those. I would like you to know that when we talk about glands, we're talking about 2 types: exocrine glands and endocrine glands. But the exocrine glands have some sort of duct system where whatever the gland is going to be emitting, it goes through the duct and to the area that it is supposed to go to. So one example of that would be your submaxillary glands or submandibular glands, same thing. Which is under your mandible, your jawbone, and you can actually usually feel these. It's like 2 fingers above the Adam's apple. You can feel like kind of like a ball-like structure underneath there. Those are your submandibular glands. That is going to produce like 70% of your saliva. So that produces the saliva and excretes it through a duct into your mouth. So enzymes like catalase can start the digestive process. Endocrine glands are other things. Those go directly into your blood, and that's everything from pituitary glands to adrenal glands, pineal glands. It is responsible for everything from puberty to regulation of glucose levels in the blood and calcium levels in the blood. Those last 2, of course, are examples of negative feedback loops. So we've seen those already this year. Okay. This is just to give you a kind of a visual overview of how you can, like a mental map of how you can organize the epithelial tissue. So it's either epithelia or glands, and then within glands, the subcategories of exocrine and endocrine. Kind of have a visual representation of that. So the functions of the epithelial tissue, they provide physical protection. So of course they are exposed to the environment. They're controlling permeability, so they can control what passes through them. So for example, the epithelial lining in your lungs lets oxygen and carbon dioxide permeate that, and can provide sensation. So it notices when things externally, not like nerve cells, but it can tell the difference sometimes between a solid, liquid, and gas, depending on where the epithelial cells are, and specialized secretions, the glandular function. So the things that you should know about this: the epithelial cells are polar. In other words, they have a top and they have a bottom. So the top and the bottom of the epithelial cells, we say the top is the apical surface, and that comes from the word apex. So that's the side of the cells that face exterior, the exterior side, or the internal space. So I'm going to clarify. External meaning like the epidermis, the outward facing, is the apical surface of the epidermis. But the internal stuff would be the lining of the tracts. So like the parts that face the, if you think about if I ate something, where the food would go would be facing the apical surface. Okay? And that's another word for those empty spaces are the lumen. And I think that's one of your words that we're working on too. And those may contain microvilli or cilia. So the microvilli would be like in your small intestine to help absorb nutrients. The cilia would be things that are lining like the esophagus, trachea, to kind of move particles around. So the other side of the cells in this polar idea is at the base, and that's what's going to attach to the adjacent tissues. It's the basolateral surface, or the basal membrane, or the basement membrane. Kind of a few different names for them. And that's going to be just usually connecting to the connective tissue that's nearby. And it connects to that through the basement membrane. The basement membrane is not cells. It's usually protein from like collagen fibers running in parallel. And those collagen fibers are what can anchor it from one layer to the next. So I like this picture, stole from Crash Course, a great resource, because it talks about, like, it shows these green epithelial cells, and these would be simple columnar cells. Then you can see the connective tissue underneath, and you also see the basement membrane, which is that's the collagen fibers that are in there. In the connective tissue, you see this yellow nerve, and then you also see this red blood vessel. So one of the things you should notice is that the connective tissue doesn't have any the epithelial tissue does not have any blood vessels. The connective tissue has all the blood vessels. So this is the apical side, this is the basal side of it. So any kind of nutrients that the epithelial cells have and they get, like oxygen, nutrients to grow, all have to diffuse through that basement membrane, because they are the cells themselves are avascular. And avascular, of course, is a fancy way of saying doesn't have any blood. So it doesn't have any blood. So nutrients fuse across the underlying connective tissue. And so the epithelial tissue has a really high cell turnover, and because they're exposed to potentially dangerous environments. So they regenerate and reproduce quickly. They're the quickest reproducing cells that you have in your body. So the skin and colon are continuously damaged and replaced. Those are great examples. Most of the dust in the air is sloughed off skin cells, so we can flake those cells off all the time. The external layer of epidermis is dead. It's keratinized. We'll talk about that more. And 85% of the cancer occurs in the epithelium because it is those fast-growing cells, and they're exposed to things like UV radiation or other possible carcinogens. And one of the things you can think about that is if these cells are reproducing and regenerating all the time, really, really quickly, that means that they are undergoing mitosis regularly. And what is cancer? It's the uncontrolled division of cells. So it's when the cells go haywire and they start reproducing over and over again. It's kind of like the most basic understanding of what cancer is. So if that's the case, then so carcinomas are epithelial origin, and squamous cell lung carcinoma is another example of that. So since they reproduce so quickly, they could go, any one of those processes could go wrong. So nomenclature of epithelial, that's just the fancy word of saying how do we name the different types of epithelial cells. First, it's by shape, and second, it's by the layers. So there are three shapes that I'd like you to know. Squamous is thin, flat, and scale. The word means scale. Cuboidal are small boxes, and columnar mean slender rectangles. Our layers are simple, which means that there's just one layer of cells, or stratified, meaning that there are two or more layers of cells that are there. So they're stacked on top of each other. And whenever there's any question, we name by the most apical layer, of the cells. So if there's any blend of those things. And the way we say these things, we always say the layer first and then the shape. So we would say, for example, simple squamous or stratified columnar. So we get the idea there. So this is a visual just to help you, like squamous is this flat, more flat than horizontal. Cuboidal is like a cube, and columnar is more vertical than horizontal. One layer for simple, multiple layers for stratified. I like this visual too because it sets it up where you can see these like simple column, you see a stratified column, and then you see the cross section of each one of those between the different types. Also, you have this pseudo-stratified columnar epithelium. So pseudo-stratified gets its name because it looks like there's more than one layer there, but actually they're all connecting to the same basement membrane. So we call that a pseudo-stratified columnar epithelium. We'd call this also ciliated. Pseudo-stratified columnar. This is another example of something from your respiratory tract. This would be like in your trachea or your bronchi. This gives you a nice overview of like all of the different combinations of things we have there and where you might find them. So we'll see some visuals with this later on, but it gives you a nice like example of all the things you're going to see, and we'll go from there. We're not going to spend a lot of time with the granular epithelium, but I want to just tell you a few things about it. It can be as small as one cell. It's more often many cells, and we'll see examples of both. Goblet cells are like mucus-producing cells, so we'll see those. Those are like the unicellular ones. And they can be simple or compound, And they can be tubular, they're going to form a tube, and you'll see some of that in your microscope, or they can have can expand like as a sac, which means that think about it as like it fills up or it contracts again. So that's what we're doing for those. This shows you some pictures of what those glands, especially the exocrine glands, can look like. So you can get the sense of what this is gonna be like, and we're gonna see this in the next unit when we get to skin. So like you can see that some of this, like the sebaceous glands, are going to look kind of like this, where it's going to be like, well, actually probably more like this, where it's going to be producing oils and sitting right next to a hair follicle. Okay. So there are 3 ways that you can actually excrete these things from glands. You can do American glands, which are undergone by exocytosis. So this is like where the cell emits just the enzyme or just the protein that you want to get out. So a great example would be, again, that same submandibular gland is going to excrete catalase as the enzyme. And enzyme is, of course, enzymes are proteins. It's going to excrete that enzyme, and that'll go to your saliva and get processed there. So that's one type. Another one would be the apocrine gland, which would be where a portion of the cell itself is pinched off. And a great example of this would be mammary glands during lactation. So if a mother is, for example, if a mother is breastfeeding, in the breast milk, you'll get pinched off portions of cells, and those pinched off portions of cells give the baby all sorts of great things, such as like antibodies to boost their immunity. So it's really babies get a lot of protection from that. And finally, holocrine glands, which are the entire cell ruptures and secretes. So I briefly mentioned sebaceous glands, the oil glands in your skin and on your scalp, and they are there to provide moisture to your skin and your hair follicles. And I'm sure you've had that if you take a shower. What you're doing is you're removing the oils from your hair that were the sebaceous oils or the sebum, and you're washing it away, which dries out your hair. And of course, then if you use conditioner, you're actually just putting oils back in to straighten out your hair and make it smooth again. This visual just does a nice job of showing you those 3 different ways of presenting them. So there's just the enzymes and proteins. This is partial parts of the cell, like in lactation, and this would be like the whole cell, like in sebum. Okay, so I want to take you through a few pictures, and more specifically about the 3 different types. So squamous epithelial cells are flat scales, and this is again on the outside of our body. So we are covered in scales. Hate to break it to you. Although our scales are so small, we don't usually see them, so we don't really see the individual cells. Occasionally, if your skin gets very dry, you might see like the outlines of some of the cells, but it's not like you're seeing every individual cell ever. Fast absorption or diffusion, thin membranes is what this is all about. It's a way to get things through, especially, for example, in your lungs. You want to get carbon dioxide and oxygen to diffuse across that membrane, so that would be a simple squamous there. Cuboidal epithelial cells. Just as the name suggests, they look like cubes. Even their nuclei are these round circular things right there in the middle. And these are great for secretions. They can absorb nutrients as well, but they're really, one of the things they're best known for is their ability to do secretions. So simple cuboidal epithelium forms ducts and tubules, and they'll kind of wrap around each other and form like a circular kind of structure. And you'll see that under the microscope too. Finally, columnar epithelial cells are columns. They are protecting and cushioning for the underlying tissue. In other words, since they're so much taller, they actually provide more protection for the stuff that's underneath. And you notice that even the nuclei are kind of oval-shaped as opposed to the spherical ones, and they're generally located closer towards that basement membrane of the cell itself. So it's out of harm's way more. Excuse me. So the stomach mucus produces, these things are going to produce and secrete a mucus in the stomach, and that lining is going to go on top of there to help protect your stomach from the stomach acid so that your stomach acid doesn't start dissolving you, right? So we want ways to make sure you stay safe. And of course, we can absorb nutrients too. We'll find these in the small intestine. So this is a great example. Form follows function. The flat cells are the easiest to pass through. In terms of like diffusion and absorption, and also the most disposable, right? These are the ones that your body turns over and gets rid of the fastest because they're in generally the most harm's way. So the body doesn't put a whole lot of time and effort into building those. So larger cells would be like the cuboidal and columnar. So they produce more secretions, and so they need more of the internal machinery of the cell to kind of make that happen, right? So cuboidal is great about wrapping into ducts and folding on each other, and then the other one, the columnar, is more about protecting the underlying tissue. Okay, so I want to show you a few pictures of what's going on here. So this one is going to be in your lungs. We have this simple squamous epithelium. So that's going to be like a single layer of tissue. And so you get the idea here that in the alveoli, move that so you can see the spelling, alveoli, you get the air that comes in, oxygen can diffuse across just like 4 membranes, and it's back into your blood then. And same with carbon dioxide in reverse. So it's a way to make sure we can get that in and out as quickly and easily and harmlessly as possible through our lungs. Okay. Simple cuboidal epithelium. You can see those tubes and those ducts that I mentioned kind of wrap around each other. You can see this is happening in your kidneys. Another visual of how that works. Okay. Simple columnar epithelium. There's a goblet cell that I mentioned before. That's one of those glandular cells that interspersed amongst the other tissue. So they produce some mucus there. Goes in your intestine. I like this visual because it shows you what you'd see under a microscope like that, and then it colors in one cell after another cell after another cell. So in this one you have the pseudo-stratified columnar epithelium, which is the first one, and then you get the goblet cells next in these blue ones, and then you get the underlying connective tissue. You don't get a great view of the basement membrane in this, but I think maybe a little bit. Okay, that's where you'd find these in the small intestine there. Stratified squamous epithelium. So this is where we start stacking these squamous, the scale cells on top of each other, and they're keratinized, which means that they become tough and they filled with this hard protein, and they're water resistant. So that's like the outside of your body is water resistant. So the skin surface is a great example. Non-keratinized is the stages before that. It's still pretty tough. It can dry out, but it's more likely to be found slightly more internally. And actually, as your epidermis grows up and up and up, it becomes more and more keratinized, and the cells then they die towards the end. So this is in the mouth, but it's similar to other regions here. We have cells that are alive down here, and as we move up, they become more keratinized and flattened out and die. Okay, another visual of that same kind of thing. I like that you can really clearly see the basement membrane in this one too. I think that's nice. The squamous, stratified squamous, and here's your skin, of course, the basement membrane, and we actually have like seven different layers of cells in just the epidermis. So we'll go through those when we get to skin. Pseudostratified columnar epithelium, you can see the same kind of thing, the pseudostratified, because it looks like there's more than one layer there. I think this is one of the better times you can see that it looks like there's more than one layer. That's in the trachea there. Here we go again, same kind of idea, pseudostratified. Those goblet cells are for mucus production is in the middle there. I like this picture. It's just a very clear picture, I feel like, to get you a visual of the mucous membrane as well as the cilia that are up there. It also shows you like the particulates that come in. You want to have them get captured and then expelled. Speaking of. So transitional epithelium is not something we're going to spend a lot of time on, but I've given you as an option to look at in the lab. It is one of those things that can actually expand and contract depending on what it's being used for at the time. So examples of this would be like in the ureters. So this is a kidney, this is the bladder. This is going to go connect those two, are called the ureters. And the bladder has the same kind of transitional epithelium. The other place you'd find it is in the uterus. The uterus, another thing, of course, because when a fetus is growing, you want to make sure that tissue can expand along with the fetus. Okay, so I'm going to just take you through this quickly. I'm not going to spend a lot of time explaining, but this is kind of a preview of what you'll see. I want to make sure you notice that it tells you the kind of tissue, and it also tells you where it's from and what kind of magnification power we're looking at for each one of these things. The lungs, we already saw that as drawing. You can really see the ducts in here, I think, with the cuboidal epithelium. And zooming in a little more in the kidney, the distal and proximal collecting tubules, or what we call those. Simple columnar epithelium. The idea in the large intestines. So as we zoom in even one more time, you can kind of see that that's a chance for it to absorb nutrients there in that columnar farther away. Stratified squamous epithelium. We're seeing this. We talked about this in like the skin, and this is the esophagus. Okay. And you have access to our presentation, of course, as well. So anytime you want to go back and see this, you can either pause in this video or you can go through the slides themselves. So pseudo-stratified, Spend some time talking about that in the trachea. And our transitional epithelium, this is a cross-section of a ureter. So connecting the kidneys to the bladder. You can kind of see that it's got a more unique structure. All right, so this is a chance for you to kind of check yourself. If you want to go through, you can kind of try to practice naming each one of these things that are here. And I got this from this website, this purposegames.com, and I think it was pretty interesting because if you go to this website, you can actually check your answers and see if it takes you through and make sure you can name all of them. So you can know, for example, that this one is simple squamous and so on, and this is a glandular epithelium. So it's like these look like cuboidal cells, but it's clearly arranged in some sort of glandular shape. Okay, and this is gives you one more example of where you're going to see some of these different types of tissues as you go throughout the body. And we'll spend some more time talking about that, but as you get into looking at this, that should help you get it. All right, thanks guys.